You sit here. Yeah.
Justin there?
Yeah, come this way. We're going to flank you.
I think Justin.
Justin sits on the, yeah, perfect,
okay.
perfect. We're going to surround you. That's what's happening. Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the morning of day one at MozFest. It's so nice to see these, I think, early risers. I'll also say this is not even the first session on data centers. I think we've already had one. So this is one of many discussions about the really important implications of all of the physical infrastructure being built everywhere around the world, whether we want it or not, to help this AI boom, whether we want that or not either. So my name's Alex Dunn, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Maybe, and I'm here co-moderating with...
I'm Justin Hendricks. I'm CEO and editor of Tech Policy Press.
And we are surrounding three wonderful people who have been working on data centers to better understand how they are being developed in different contexts around the world, investigating the implications of some of these, and also when they're being built without any transparency, attempting to try and better tell stories and help us understand how these companies are making choices that have huge implications for energy, water, air quality, and community safety, I would say even. So to kick us off, I wanted each of you to introduce yourselves, and when you do that, if you could share a little bit about the work you do, and also a story about data center development that you think would help us sort of kick off a conversation about the issues that we are dealing with when we talk about the physical infrastructure that we're seeing pop up all around the world. So Pablo, do you want to go first? Just a little bit about the work that you do and something that you feel like sharing a story about a particular data center development that just gives us a sense of what's going on.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for being here. My name is Pablo Jimenez Arandia. I'm an investigative reporter and freelance journalist from here, based in Barcelona. And yeah, like for the last couple of years now, I've been doing quite some work on the data center expansion and data center boom in several countries. I started working on this topic here in Spain since I started to listen to news of huge data centers from US tech giants coming to Spain. And like 1 year ago, I like expanded the project to 2 countries in Latin America, Chile and Mexico. Thanks to a fellowship program with the Policy Center, I've been digging into what are the implications for local communities, but also what is the role of local authorities, companies, and I've been looking quite in detail into like more than a dozen projects, like in different stages of development. Like some of them are already built, some of them are under construction, and some others are only planned. So I mean, I think that is a huge topic that for sure during this session we will be looking into like different angles, because this is a story that has like multiple angles that can be used to look into it. But yeah, thinking about like one specific story that I found relevant, probably like one of the work that I've done in Mexico. I've been focused in the region of Querétaro, which is becoming like one of the huge hubs for data centers in Latin America. And yeah, there is Microsoft is one of the companies that is building there one of its new hyperscale hub. For those that don't know, I mean, hyperscale is the way that the industry calls to those data centers which are the biggest ones, and so I mean, we've been looking really in detail into this hub of data centers from Microsoft, and we found how, for instance, like authorities there, they don't ask the company to disclose any information about something as basic as the cooling system that they use So that means how much water they need to cool the servers inside the warehouses that they have. So, and at the same time, I mean, we were like doing quite some reporting on the field, and we were visiting like, the rural communities that they actually have like these data centers in their backyard, literally. And people there, they knew nothing about what was going on in these data centers, and they didn't even know that they needed water to operate. And these same people, they are facing like water outage, like almost on a daily basis. So it's a huge drought-stricken area, Querétaro. So yeah, I think that this specific case exemplifies quite well what we are dealing with, and yeah, and there are like other issues with this specific project. They are using gas generators. I mean, we uncovered how they are using fossil fuel energy on site. I mean, they couldn't connect to the national electricity grid, so basically they decided, instead of waiting to have like all this infrastructure that they need, they decided just to install like a bunch of gas generators that to kick off operations from these data centers. So I think that this really exemplifies the way big tech companies work, right? I mean, it's build fast and start operating as soon as possible without looking into the implications and the footprint that they leave like in the communities.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. Yeah.
Sure. So, hello, my name is Paz Peña. I'm the Mozilla Senior Fellow studying data centers. I'm focused on understanding the social environmental impacts of data centers in Latin America. So I've been working a lot with my colleague. So one of the things that I believe is important, as you know, a very interesting story, is that in Latin America, activism against data centers started back in 2020. The Santiago in Chile is a big case, right? And I think it's very interesting because there's a very interesting history around data centers or communities taking data centers to court, right? So this is really interesting because it's not only about holding accountable companies, but also governments, right? Because governments has a lot to do in data centers investments in Latin America. So one case is, for example, the case of Chile in Santiago, in a little neighborhood in Santiago called Cerrillos. Google started a data center there back in the 2020, and the community take the case to the court, and actually last year, I think, the court said that the government should not only inform, to the audience, to the public, the use of water and the different social environmental impacts, but also to take into consideration the climate change impacts on the data center environmental impact assessment, right? So this is really interesting, right? Because what we are discussing actually is that data centers are actually affecting the way we are dealing with climate change. So you can see an example from Chile that this is something that is taken into account, right? That's one, which I think is super important for the world, actually. And the second one is that happening in Uruguay. So again, Google, I don't know why, is under the controversy, right? Because they are building a data center in Montevideo, in Canelones. It's the capital, right? And Uruguay is going through a really tough drought period. People actually in Montevideo is taking showers with, water like, I don't know how you say in English now, like water that is in a pocket, right? Exactly, pockets of water. It's a terrible situation for common citizens. And they announced that they're going to build data centers there in that situation. So that is incredible, right? So people decided to take this case to the court, because when they asked the government to know what will be the amount of water that these data centers will consume, they say, we cannot say it because it's corporate secret. Like the government is saying it's corporate secret. So the court finally says, you cannot take, the corporate secret as an excuse to not give information to people, especially on water. Water is, a resource that everyone needs to know what's happening, right? So again, the court is talking to the government, trying to hold accountable the government to give information about these investments and the social environmental impacts. Again, I think this is really important too, right? Because again, one of the problems that we're having in Latin America with data centers is the use of water, but also because of we are living the consequences of climate change. And one of the consequences of climate change in Latin America is the drought, right? Chile, Mexico, Brazil even, we're all facing drought. So I think it's very important to hear these kind of stories that actually courts are actually functioning, trying to hold accountable governments around data centers.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Tessa. I'm the impact editor at Lighthouse Reports. I'll just explain a little bit about who we are at Lighthouse before I get into our approach. But Lighthouse is an investigative nonprofit, and we're behind investigative stories that you might see in newspapers and in media around the world. We're not a publishing platform ourselves, but we work in collaboration with other journalists and other newsrooms in order to publish investigations and to go where audiences are already consuming their news. And so we focus on a couple of different issue areas, one of those being surveillance and AI, one being power imbalances in food systems, conflict and human rights abuses on borders, and also accountability in post-conflict zones. And I think a specific focus of our work at Lighthouse Reports is not just publishing a story, but understanding what the role of journalism and responsibility of accountability journalism is in taking that story or being able to utilize that story to have real-world impacts. And so that means that journalism has to and should go beyond just publishing a story and think about the ways in which, policymakers who might be advocating for regulations on data centers might use that information to benefit their cause, or thinking about how communities who are directly affected by data centers themselves might be able to use the findings from that report to strengthen their cause, or how litigators might be able to use those findings as well. So we're thinking about ourselves in the broader ecosystem of these actors and playing a very active role in that. So myself as the impact editor, often what that means is a shift in thinking of, the people who experience, for example, the first-hand harms of data centers, the communities themselves, a shift away from thinking of people just as sources or as points of information, but thinking of them as the reason that you do the story, but also the main beneficiaries of that story. And I think that fundamentally changes the way in which we report, and definitely the media partners in which we report with. I think a big problem is that, a big focus on, AI work is focusing on, the benefits of AI and delivering this story to consumers who are really, really excited about this. But it kind of ignores the way in which communities are experiencing the harms or the repercussions of that needless expansion. I think what that means is making sure that those stories are delivered in communities in ways in which they engage with the news, but also in languages in which they engage with as well. And I think that's something that has been surprising about our work at Lighthouse, is maybe not so surprising, but how much time and space it takes to build trust with communities who have been systematically screwed over by governments, by tech companies, by the media even themselves, to build trust in order for those findings to resonate with those communities. And I think an example of a story that I think does this well, and something that comes to mind, is the data center that was built, or XAI's data center in Memphis, which was a data center that kind of cropped up pretty much, overnight. And the communities were hearing about it was from the smell of the gas that was coming into their houses and the confusion, of that community if they had collectively all left their gas stoves on. But it was actually, the new reality of that town. And I think this story just goes to show the, complete disregard, first of all, of companies like XAI, who received no, regulation permits to open this data center, did not consult the communities at all, and yet are doing so to generate a huge amount of excitement and a huge amount of revenue for their own personal AI pursuits, which for XAI is pretty much just grok, which I don't think anybody could say really tangibly benefits their lives in any way. And I think this story just speaks to the kind of maybe values or ideas behind many of these AI pursuits, which is, for the sole pursuit of profit for companies at the very expense of the communities who experience water shortages, whose lives are changed. And those communities, it's not just an annoyance of a noise or a smell, it's those people in those towns are getting sick, are getting respiratory illnesses, are suffering from asthma or bronchitis because of the way, because of the high risk of the gases. And I think this story shows the power imbalance, but also speaks to the need for journalists to focus on the way in which communities experience the expansion of AI and the data centers that are involved.
That's great. Justin, do you want to jump in, hearing all of those things laid out in that beautiful way? Thanks, guys.
So I suppose I'm going to ask a question that I guess I'll first just kind of frame it up, thinking about data centers, maybe zooming way out and then zooming way in. I mean, one thing that I think about a lot is, the scale of this project to build this AI infrastructure across the planet. If you were to stand up on the moon right now and look down and ask yourself, what are those creatures doing? You would say, well, they're building concrete boxes everywhere, big ones, and they're running power to them, and they're trying to figure out how to make this infrastructure work. It would be visible from space, the infrastructure that we're building. One of the largest, perhaps, infrastructure projects that we've done as a species in many, many decades. So I think about that. But then I also think about a small rural community where I'm from in Virginia, where they had a data center fight. And it was very interesting to me, really observing closely the kind of community meetings and the protests and how scrambled the politics were. It wasn't just left versus right. There were people in MAGA hats next to hippies who were concerned about the environment. There were a lot of concerns coming out about the economy and about labor and jobs and about corporations and that sort of thing. So I kind of want to ask this group a question, which is like, it feels to me over the last year, the last two, we have, as a journalistic community, covered the tip of the iceberg. These things have sprouted up, and we've said, look there, there's this thing now. And why don't we know about it? Why aren't governments telling us about it? Why are there all these NDAs and secrecy, et cetera? And we're beginning to unpack the different bits. But I'd be interested in each of you, and you've all begun to talk about this. What's next as we kind of look under the surface? The issues that we have to move to in the next year, the submerged that part of the iceberg on this AI infrastructure story. What do you think you'll be writing about in the next year to 2 years? Maybe we'll just kind of go down the line. I don't know. Tessa, you want to start this time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, something that I think that, to get past the tip of the iceberg is, I think once people have now, as you pointed out, started to become aware of the necessity of data centers to fuel things like OpenAI's ChatGPT, they start to become more aware of the environmental issues that are associated with it. I think that the media starts to shift into this cause and effect of consumer shaming, of saying that, it's the problem of people overusing ChatGPT for needless queries. And yes, I do think there's an element or an extent to which, people need to use AI in an ethical way, and that includes thinking about the environmental impacts of your ChatGPT queries. But I think it's important for journalists to remember that the people or the consumers of AI are not really the enemy here. It's the focus or upcoming needs to be on the companies that are profiting from it, but also, as you pointed out, Paz, the governments that have allowed this expansion to come at the very cost of, communities being able to live in a safe way, communities being able to access their own water. And so I do think that a big focus needs to be put on the lack of regulation of these governments and the purposeful, way in which they have allowed companies to take advantage and extort communities.
I think the biggest story here for me is that big tech are in a way transforming themselves as energy actors, right? Today, data centers are the biggest clients for energy companies, like in the world, right? They are consuming so much energy that they are the biggest client. And what we're seeing is something really weird. It's a weird monster that we have to look at, right? Because what we're seeing, at least in Latin America, is that because they need renewables, basically what they are doing is that energy companies, renewable energy companies back in Latin America are building data centers to basically rent those data centers to big tech because it's their biggest client. So what it implies, right? It implies that basically the energy transition is based on the needs of big tech, which is wild, right? So imagine, we are facing the biggest challenge of humanity today is climate change. We are facing this 21st century with the power of big tech companies in our lives, right? Data, etc. But now with energy. This is incredibly dangerous, and I think we are not talking enough about this, and I think this is the hidden story that we need to actually unpack.
Yeah, well, I think that all the points that Tessa and Paz touch are, really make sense, and just trying to add something a bit different, and also based on the work that I've done, which is really locally focused, on specific projects, specific communities. I think that we will be seeing a lot of litigations coming from grassroots movements, NGOs. I mean, this is actually happening in some countries. It's starting to happen here in Spain. It's happening also in Mexico. I think in the US, which is a market that I don't know that well, but from what I see, in the media coverage, I mean, this is also happening for some time already. So I think that there is going to be an increasing opposition from local communities and also really local authorities, and this is going to probably, I mean, this is already this is already making companies to act to reshape a bit their strategies, and this is something that, for instance, I saw in Chile. I mean, I think the Chilean case, all the resistances against these huge projects, I think probably it's a unique case in the world, Chile. I mean, the case of Cerrillos that Pat mentioned, which is a crazy story. I always say that you could really make a great movie from it, or a really great series or a show, because it was basically a group of normal people, neighbors that stand up, and in a matter of few weeks they became experts in a really technical and difficult to understand industry, and they were able to basically challenge a giant as Google, right? So I think that in the local sphere, I think that we will keep seeing like more movements, and this of course will connect with what Tessa mentioned about potentially like new regulations and also like going more like on the macro level, and also connecting with this idea of how do we put guardrails into this industry. I think that yeah, there is this idea of, I mean, this is not the only AI possible. I mean, there are, this is the AI that a group of elites in Silicon Valley are deciding to be. So there are like alternatives to build like more sustainable, more like fair systems towards the planet and the people that live that we live here. So yeah, I think that like work from the regulatory side probably has to come like, yeah, regaining the power that like democratic institutions used to have sometime towards these huge private actors, and also thinking of alternatives, like being creative. Like, I mean, this is not inevitable. I mean, there are like alternatives to do things in a different way.
As more of this iceberg is visible to the public, I mean, if you had said 24 months ago, there's a data center being built and it's going to create jobs and it's going to bring money to your local community, people may have said, that sounds great. And 24 months later, it feels like there's at least a growing sense that that's a pretty bad deal. There's more stories about it, there's more investigations, and there's just, I feel like a general zeitgeist that understanding that this is not a sustainable enterprise and potentially not one we want to support. But as people are becoming more aware, that doesn't necessarily mean that the trajectory of this project is influenced by that awareness. And I'm wondering if when you think about your reporting and more coverage of these topics, do you have a sense of anything changing, or sort of what do you want people to be doing with that information? Are you seeing early signs that a better understanding of the implications is actually leading to better decision making among policymakers or among publics? Sort of how are you all feeling about this reporting actually sort of changing what's happening? And I feel like I won't make all of you answer this unless you all have an answer to this one, because it's a tough one. But do any of you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between the fight against data centers and the fight against fossil fuel expansion. And I think that, something that comes to mind, at least, from an Australian perspective, is that the movement was at its strongest, I think, when there was a higher level of cross-sector collaboration to fight against or advocate against the opening of, or the expansion of fracking or the opening of new coal mines. And I think that, that involved there being some level of coordination between the campaigners on the ground, between First Nations communities, between lawyers and advocates, and between the media to understand the implications and the risks of opening a new coal mine in an area, or for that own community, but also the repercussions for the rest of the country as well. And I think that movement was at its strongest when it was led as well by the traditional owners of that land, who are the stewards of that land, but also should be the ones who are ultimately making the decisions over what happens there. And I think that, something that I think that data center reporting can learn from that, and I think is learning from that, is the way in which it centers the fight from the communities, but also the traditional owners as well. And something that comes to mind is Lace Martin's reporting from The Intercept, where she looks at the Anase indigenous communities in the north of Brazil, and how they're resisting a TikTok data center opening in their area. And I think that, understanding the way in which journalism can report on and uplift the voices of those who are organizing protests, who are filing legal actions, who are coordinating efforts across communities, I think is something that is something that reporters can learn from as well.
I absolutely agree, and actually I love Lace Martin's work. It's impressive, right? Especially in Latin America. But I think maybe there's a difference. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But I guess in the US, what we're seeing is that there's more than a half of the data centers in the world are in US, right? And in the last 5 years, all these data centers are becoming AI data centers. So that's why there's a huge reaction, right? Because the amount of energy, the amount of water, the amount of resources that they need is actually there, and people are seeing this. So that's why you explain, in a way, why there are so many reactions in the last 2-3 years than before, no? Because data centers are being existing from, the early digitization, but now with AI it's different, right? So you can see this in the US, and you can see all this incredible media coverage, which I think is amazing, actually. In a way, in Europe, I would say it's the same, a little bit-ish, no? But in the case of Latin America, I will say that, of course, the reporting has been incredible. I have no doubt about that. But we're, in the transition of becoming hubs of data centers, in the case of Brazil, in the case of Mexico, in the case of Chile, for example, who are the 3 countries that are top in the data center industry. And there's still this idea, especially in governments, that this is great, right? We need to attract foreign investments of, big tech, because big tech is great, right? It's the future. There's still this issue in governments. But also because if you really think, at least you are in Brazil, but in the rest of the countries, actually the own capacity to build competitive technology is super few, right? Because we are very small markets, but also we don't have, enough E+D investments, etc. So in a way, I'm not saying I'm believing, but in a way you can understand that governments are eager to actually have this kind of data centers in their countries, right? So I think we are still lacking of, more critical perspectives, but not even from communities, but from governments, We don't have critical perspectives from governments around technology. And I'm saying this from right-wing governments and left-wing governments, which I think is quite depressing right now, no? Because you can see, for example, Lula's government or Boric's government in case of Chile, that they are actually buying all this stuff from big tech. They are not actually doing any really important thing around, own companies and own technologies and sovereignty, even though in Brazil there's a huge controversy around this. But again, I think we are dealing with this, and in a way, reporting has been not enough to actually break that kind of believing of governments on big tech companies.
Yeah, I just want to add, following a bit what Pat just mentioned, and maybe I'm anticipating to another question that you will pose about what are the benefits of cross-border work into this issue. She has been already mentioned here, Laís Martins from Brazil. Recently, a few weeks ago, I was with her, and she mentioned one quote that a senior official from the Brazilian government said, that was basically, he told her that, all these things with AI data centers, it was like a train coming at high speed and nobody was in the locomotive, driving it, right? And this was coming from a senior official in Brazil. A few weeks ago, this was off the record to Laís, but I'm sharing this here. I'm not saying the name of the...
Off the record until now, yeah.
I got her permission to share this.
Good job.
But very recently, I read some public quotes from official from Aragon, the region of Aragon, very close to here, which is now one of the biggest hubs in Europe for this industry. And he was saying almost exactly the same words, I mean, this idea of a train coming at high speed and nobody's in the in the locomotive, he's driving it, he's putting any kind of guardrails. And so
in this metaphor, are you on the train or is the train coming towards you?
Well, I think that both options are not
Okay.
are not very hopeful. So, but it's great. I mean, when I saw this quote from this Spanish, regional official in Aragon, I wrote to Lais and I said, this is exactly the same thing that this guy from Brazil was saying, right? So I think we have to be aware of this, like people that is in charge, like in governments, officials, they are starting to have like more information about what are the implications of this industry, but there is this huge imbalance, like power imbalance, but also like information balance, right? So, and I connect this with something that also I heard from, I don't remember who this guy was, but yeah, he was like working in the industry and more like on the policy side, and he said something that like talking about Spain. Yeah, if you are like a mayor of a small town in Aragon, in Spain or in Mexico, and you listen that Microsoft or AWS, Amazon is coming to your town and is gonna spend like billions of dollars in this project, it's extremely difficult to say no to this, right? So I think that we have. It's a tough question. What the steps that we should take, right? But we have to in everything that we do, or we have to be aware of this power imbalance, and this connects with what I said before about like regaining power of democratic institutions, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just follow up on where this has gone in terms of the conversation, and also shout out to Lais, who's a fellow at Tech Policy Press this year. Can you all hear me? I'm not sure if this thing's on.
A shout out to Lais, who's also a fellow at Tech Policy Press this year, and has written about exactly the phenomenon you talk about how the Brazilian government, even as Lula is standing at the UN saying lots of things about sovereignty and defending Brazil from Trump's behavior, they're also doing deals with American tech firms and trying to lure data centers and industry. So I guess I want to ask about that, about the extent to which, in what you're observing in your reporting, there is maybe say a little more about that disconnect, whether you're seeing any awareness of or political discourse in the communities you're covering about a lot of this data center expansion as kind of an imperial project, an American project, one that's very much at this point backed by the American state, backed by the full faith and credit of the Trump administration. Is it seen that way? Is there an awareness of that? Are there concerns about it that you're hearing on the ground?
I can go. Not really. Of course, you're gonna find different communities and different ideologies within the same community, right? So you will find different positions on this. But in general, I will say no. I was actually in an earlier panel talking about an example that for me is quite interesting. In Chile, I was interviewing a member of the community, and the guy was, the first thing that they tell me is like, really, I'm really uncomfortable to being against the data centers because I use Google services for free. So I'm really not, happy to do this because I think it's contradictory in some way, which is something that you will find a lot, right? Because it's in a way, everyone can feel a little bit uncomfortable with that, right? Then you can have the reflection that this is not an individual problem, it's the problem of the state that doesn't give more options for communities to actually have a free email, etc., right? So you can go there, but it's not necessarily the reflection, I would say, with communities. But also, this guy told me something that was very interesting because he was like, we are against this data center, not because we're against big tech, but because big tech is an opportunity for us, for other bad actors, companies around my neighborhood that can raise the bar of environmental behavior, right? So big tech, in a way, is a good actor because they have this whole public relationships, idea of, have a great image in the world, etc. No? And there are so many bad actors, polluting water, polluting air, etc. So it will depend, of course, of the context of each community, right? It's not something that is happening the same in all communities. This is first. But the second thing that I wanted to actually add to my early answer, which I think is important because I was remember that some journalists were asking me, there's a lot of evidence, right? So of the social environmental impacts on data centers in Latin America. So why they are building it? Why governments are doing this? So one answer will be the investments, right? It's super difficult to say no to these millionaire investments. Second, you could say there's a lack of critical thinking about technology. That's the second thing. But the third thing, and I think it's really important to address it, is the lobby activities that big tech are having around data centers and infrastructure in all our governments, in Europe, in the US, and of course in Latin America. Agencia Pública, which is media from Brazil, did this incredible research where they find that in Brazil and in Chile, there are more lobby activities by big tech than the average of the European Union, right? And one of the biggest issues that they are discussing is infrastructure, data centers, and sustainability. Sustainability, right? So you can say that one of the reasons that we are having these data centers is because they are putting a lot of money in lobby activities, no? So this is something that we have to address too.
Yeah, just like following a bit what Pat just said, also we have to be aware that these companies are huge PR machines. They have like tons of really smart people working on marketing and public relations, so that really shapes also, yeah, public opinion and a bit, yeah, I agree with Pat, like following the question from Justin, there is generally like still like a really lack of critical perspective towards, I mean, yeah, you can start seeing some things from, yeah, left-wing governments here in Spain, some actors, but still, I mean, and also we have to be aware that like yeah, like right-wing forces are like having an increasing also political power here in Europe. So it's still very scarce, right? Like this. But also I wanted to point out that, yeah, we've been saying that there's been a lot of great reporting and investigations, both from journalists, but also, yeah, NGOs. The Maybe has done great work on this too. But still, I mean, and I've been following quite closely here in Spain and specifically in Aragon, what is the coverage around this industry. I think that that's very relevant, but because at least here in Spain, people still read a lot like local newspapers, right? So you can publish like a story. I publish my stories about data centers in Spanish in El País, which is a big outlet and it's great, but still like a lot of people read local papers, right? And I've been following a bit like the coverage that they do, and you can really see how these companies are putting a lot of money into these regional or local papers, right? I mean, you can see a lot of openly stated branded content, some other that is not that open. I mean, that it's actually branded content, but it's framed as a standard news. So yeah, I mean, they are really powerful actors with a lot of resources. So you know, is this thing of, yeah, and there are like certain myths and certain narratives around this industry. I mean, I think that, for instance, all this idea of, employment, like job creation that we haven't mentioned yet. Yesterday there was a great story in the rest of the world about Chile and yeah, how basically all the promises of these companies about how many jobs do these companies create. I mean, how many people is working once they are operating these data centers, because one thing is when they are building them, which, yeah, there is a lot of people working there, but once they start to operate, the amount of work created is, I mean, it's really small, really, really small. So, but you keep seeing this narrative coming from local politicians and saying this is going to bring us economic growth, and then also like economic growth, how do you measure it? I mean, they say there was also like, I think that this piece in the rest of the world was mentioning like a study from the Chilean government that they were, the numbers they were making, I mean, they were counting that, yeah, someone that works with cloud service in Chile, I mean, they count it as like a job creator, right? So there are like all these, these ideas that are still like really root and are quite difficult to challenge, right? So, I mean, I think that, as Alex said, I mean, we are not in the same situations as a few years ago. Also, we have to keep in mind that like context really matters. Like it really depends the country. What I saw in Mexico, in Querétaro, I mean, people there, I mean, they didn't even know, I mean, what a data center was, like the communities I was visiting, but also, I mean, there was no media coverage around like potential negative implications. So sometimes we only look to the US and Europe, but in the global South, all this awareness that we are talking about, I think that's still like very, very scarce. So, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the media has a big responsibility for the way in which the discourse around the AI expansion is shaped, and that predominantly focuses on it being a good thing, on excitement for people, whereas maybe, you know, those realities of what AI can bring us aren't necessarily shaping up to what we thought they might be, or aren't always as making so much progress as we think that they could or should. And, you know, I think that, to your point, it is totally an imperialist and colonialist task that, you know, these American companies are carrying out. And something that comes to mind is the way in which Guyana, a country north of Venezuela, has positioned themselves to be like a hub for data center infrastructure. And they're banking on, you know, using the energy that came from the huge amounts of investments in gas infrastructure, because they, you know, have a lot of energy from these investments, and they're hoping to power their data centers from it. And I think this kind of turns this whole country in a way, you know, to the service of American companies that are using that, you know, using that energy, using that infrastructure from the data centers to their own benefit in a way that benefits the local communities or the people in Guyana very little, and is completely about extraction and about benefits to these Western companies.
That's great. Okay, well, a last question. So for folks that are trying to follow this, it can be difficult. So you guys are obviously, this is your bread and butter. You're focused on data centers globally. But what should people be looking out for over the next year if they're trying to understand, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What are the kind of key stories that you're going to be following, and that maybe folks in the room, folks in the live stream should also be paying attention to, just for them to be tracking what's happening and the kind of overall trajectory of things?
I will say that the big story in the next 2 years will be the energy bills that we're paying and that we are subsidizing to big tech companies. This is something that you are already seeing in the US, in Ireland. It's not so clear in other parts of the world, so we need to do a lot of research on that. But I will say that if we can do that story, if that people can understand that they are paying for electricity for big tech companies, this is going to be huge. And I think that is the story that I will follow in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, something I think that continually comes up as, you know, as we're speaking to communities who are facing the harms of data centers being built is that, you know, whilst they're advocating against a data center being built in their community, I think a lot of people have guilt about the fact that, you know, well, if we resist this data center here, it's just going to go down the road and it's just going to impact another community, and they're just going to have the same repercussions that we're facing, the same water shortages, the same electricity problems, the same the same smell, the same noise pollution. And I think something that I'm following is, and what comes to mind is the work of, I think it's Global Action Plan in the UK and Foxglove, which are trying to coordinate different communities to fight and advocate against data centers and AI expansion. And I think that's something that will come up and be more relevant, is the way in which these communities can coordinate so that, you know, data centers can't just move to the next town and the next town, that they are being told that the way that they need to fundamentally do things has to be different.
Yeah, I totally agree with Path. I think that, like, we've been talking about water, and of course that's an issue, and especially like in areas where yeah, water is a problem. Like we mentioned Mexico. I mean, the three countries that I've worked on like more intensely, that's an issue. But energy is like the big game. You just have to listen to like the CEOs from Silicon Valley, and yeah, they when they talk about this industry, I mean, they are saying it openly and publicly. I mean, that there is not enough energy like right now in the world to power like all these huge infrastructure projects, right? So yeah, I think that we have to really look into all the implications, like from the environmental side, but also from the policy perspective. I mean, how public money and taxpayers' money is going to build this infrastructure. And also one thing that also one colleague reporter told me recently. I mean, how if you go, like, there is like an increasing number of AI and energy summits, like from the industry, happening like across the world, and their main obsession is finding new available zones. That means, I mean, the U.S. market is saturated, of course, now. Well, with Trump administration, I mean, they are basically accepting to reopen like nuclear plants and other crazy stuff, but still it's really saturated. The same happens in Europe with Central and North Europe. So like electricity grids from in a lot of countries, I mean, they cannot, they are not ready. I mean, they cannot, Spain, for instance, I mean, it's a huge, we produce a lot of green energy, but the energy, then you have to transport it, right? And you need like a huge infrastructure also to do this. So there is, they are intensely chasing and searching for new available zones to build up new hyperscale data centers. And the reason why they are doing this is because, they need energy and they need it quickly. So we have to really look into what is going on there.
That's great. Okay, we're at time. I will say these folks will be here the next 3 days, and also there's several other sessions on this question because it is such a big topic. So if you're interested, there's going to be more opportunities to learn more and explore these I don't know, these next years ahead of us, which feel really important to get right given the number of crises we're facing. So thank you so much for coming to this. Thank you all for being so expert on all of these different national stories and contexts. And thank you for your reporting as well, because it makes a really big difference telling the public what's going on. So thank you for that.